My mother demanded my entire salary to help my cousin launch a failed business. Family comes first. I said, then why was I left out when you all took the payout? Family comes first, Callie. We all have to make sacrifices for each other. That was the line my mom always used whenever she needed something, from a ride across town to thousands of dollars I never saw again. I believed it for most of my life, until I learned what she really meant. Family comes first, as long as it doesn't inconvenience anyone but you. I'm 36 now, married with a child, and I haven't spoken to my mother in 3 years. But if you'd told me back then that this is where we'd end up, I would have called you dramatic. I was the loyal daughter, the one who always showed up, always helped out, never asked for much in return. That role was engraved into me like a family heirloom. But everything cracked the day I found out my entire extended family cashed in on a hidden piece of family property, and never even told me about it. I grew up in Sacramento, California. Just me and my mom. My dad died when I was 5, an accident on a construction site. After that, it was just the two of us scraping by. My mom, Viola, worked herself into exhaustion for years, and while I resented how controlling she could be, I also admired her strength. She made sure I never felt the weight of being fatherless, even if she sometimes weaponized that guilt. My mom had 2 siblings, my Aunt Denise and Uncle Ray, and they had plenty of kids between them. Holidays and birthdays were a whirlwind of cousins, casseroles, and passive-aggressive remarks passed around like dessert. Out of all the cousins, Leandro, Aunt Denise's only son, was the golden boy. Everyone loved him. He had that magnetic kind of confidence that let him talk himself into and out of anything. Leandro didn't work a day in his life growing up. He got into trouble at school, never held a job, but always had new clothes and gadgets. My mom made excuses for him constantly. He just hasn't found his path, she'd say. Boys are different. Meanwhile, I was holding down 2 part-time jobs while going to college full-time and still managed to drive home on weekends to help her clean the gutters. After I graduated from UC Davis with a degree in accounting, I got a job in Oakland. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and I finally had health insurance, a 401k, and a tiny studio apartment of my own. For the first time in years, I felt like I could exhale. I wasn't rich, but I had control over my life. That lasted a few weeks. One Saturday, my mom invited me over for lunch. When I arrived, she wasn't alone, Aunt Denise and Leandro were there too. I knew something was up. They weren't a let's randomly hang out on weekends kind of crew. My mom set down her fork like she was about to deliver some sacred news. Leandro has an incredible business opportunity, she said. He wants to open a store. Vapes, accessories, all that new tech. It's booming right now. I listened politely, nodding as Leandro rattled off vague plans about branding, suppliers, and some buddy in San Jose who made 6 figures in 6 months. Then they dropped the real reason I was there. They wanted me to contribute financially. Specifically, they wanted me to send $2,500 a month, for at least a year. I remember blinking, thinking it was a joke. That was basically my entire paycheck after taxes and bills. You're the only one with steady income right now, my mom said. You don't have kids. You don't have a mortgage. You can afford to help. We're all sacrificing for this. I told them no. Politely but firmly. But that wasn't the end of it. My mom started calling every day. Then she started showing up, at my work, at my apartment, unannounced and weepy. I gave you everything, Callie, she'd say. Is this how you repay me? It was like being emotionally mugged on a daily basis. I cracked. I agreed to help for 6 months, max. I cut every expense I could and started wiring money into Leandro's account. 6 months passed, and the store wasn't even fully open yet. There were delays, fines, issues with the lease. But I kept paying, because my mom said we can't let him fail now. I ended up sending money for nearly 18 months. And the business? It flopped. Hard. Leandro ran it into the ground. He didn't do any proper research, got in trouble for not having the right permits, and let his friends work the counter, where they stole merchandise. Eventually the shop just closed. Quietly. Without fanfare. Like it had never happened. I asked about the money. No one had answers. Aunt Denise said, it was a risk. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. My mother said I was being materialistic and that family doesn't keep receipts. I was stunned. Hurt. But still, I didn't cut them off. I just distanced myself. I focused on my life again. Paid off some debt. Went to therapy. Eventually, I met Arthur. He was a nurse, patient and kind, the kind of man who made quiet things feel big. We got engaged after a year and planned a small wedding. I didn't invite most of my extended family. My mom lost it. "You're being spiteful," she screamed over the phone. "After all I did for you." "No," I replied. "I'm just tired of being used." 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was 8 months along during Thanksgiving and decided to visit my mom, mostly out of guilt. Arthur had a shift that day, and I figured I could manage a few awkward hours for the sake of tradition. When I walked in, there were about a dozen people already there, including Leandro and Aunt Denise. My stomach clenched. But I kept it civil. I sat, ate, and tried not to react as Leandro bragged about a new crypto venture and some underground NFT launch. Then, after dessert, I overheard a conversation that shattered me. Leandro asked, "So when do we get the second payout?" Uncle Ray replied, "Next week, once the city finalizes the sale." "Payout? What payout?" I leaned forward and asked my mom what they were talking about. She tried to brush it off. But eventually, it came out, they had sold the vacant lot my grandfather left behind years ago. The land had appreciated significantly and was being converted into a commercial development. Each sibling, and their kids, got a hefty payout. Leandro, Aunt Denise, even some second cousins. Everyone except me. I was stunned. Why wasn't I told about this? My mom didn't look me in the eye. It was meant for the bloodline. The family. "I am family," I said. "You're not one of the direct heirs. You wouldn't understand." I felt my unborn daughter shift in my belly. My pulse pounded in my ears. I realized, right then, that all those years of being loyal, of being the good daughter, the helper, the one who gave up her salary, they never saw me as part of them. It was convenient. A utility. Never a beneficiary. I stood up without a word and left. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or slam doors. I just went home. Quiet. Numb. Arthur got home late from the hospital. I was curled up on the couch, still in my coat, my hands resting on my belly. He took one look at me and knew something had happened. I told him everything, slowly, calmly, while he sat silently, rubbing slow circles into my back. When I finished, he said, "This doesn't sound like a one-time betrayal, Callie. It sounds like a pattern you've just never had the space to see before." He was right. It wasn't just the money or the land or the exclusion. It was every moment of being asked to give, expected to accommodate, praised for being so helpful but never really included. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place in a family that never saw me as more than a reliable extension of my mother. And when it came time to share something of real value, something that could have helped my new family, they didn't even think of me. The following weeks were quiet. My phone buzzed with calls from my mom, Aunt Denise, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. None of the messages included an apology, just variations of "you're being too sensitive," "we thought you were doing fine," or "let's not make this bigger than it is." My mom finally sent a text that said, "You're about to have a baby. Don't bring that child into the world with all this bitterness." That one stuck with me for days. Bitterness. That's what she called it. Not betrayal. Not exclusion. Bitterness. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and turned off notifications from every single family member. The silence that followed was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. I gave birth to June a few weeks later. She was perfect. Pink and loud and healthy. Arthur cried when he held her for the first time, and I remember looking at her tiny face and thinking, "I will never ask you to choose between yourself and your family. I will never teach you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." We didn't tell anyone on my side of the family that she was born. Not my mother. Not Aunt Denise. No one. I thought I might feel guilt, but all I felt was peace. There was no chaos. No guilt-laced expectations. No phone calls demanding I drive across town or send money. Just me, Arthur, and June. It was quiet. And it was enough. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as the family's fortune unraveled. Apparently, the sale of the land came with fine print, terms none of them had fully understood. The initial payout had been generous, but the second was delayed due to zoning conflicts. Leandro had blown through his share within a few months: crypto, a car lease, flashy electronics. Then came the inevitable posts on Facebook about haters and people praying for your downfall. Aunt Denise tried to organize a reinvestment effort for a new business venture, some sort of wellness cafe, but it flopped when no one would contribute. My mother, who'd used her portion to quit her job and retire early, ended up having to move in with Denise when her savings dried up. And yet, they never reached out with an apology. Never once said, "We should have included you." They just kept sending vague messages, pictures of old family get-togethers, and photos of my late father, like invoking him might soften me. I didn't respond. Instead, I got deeper into therapy. I finally started unpacking years of emotional manipulation I had confused for obligation. I started understanding how early my role had been defined, how being the good daughter meant being silent, agreeable, and endlessly useful. How their version of love was conditional on my compliance. I started to talk about it more openly, with Arthur, with close friends, and even with my colleagues. And every time I told someone what happened, I noticed the same expression in their eyes: recognition. Like they, too, knew what it felt like to be taken for granted by the people who claimed to love them the most. One afternoon, when June was about 6 months old, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized my mother's cursive immediately. It was 5 pages long. No apology. No ownership. Just a carefully crafted narrative about how she did what she thought was best, how life is hard for everyone, and how family will always be family, no matter what. The last line read, "I hope one day you'll let us meet your daughter. She has our blood, after all." I folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. A reminder that shared DNA doesn't entitle anyone to access your life. That just because someone raised you doesn't mean they get to keep hurting you and still expect an invitation to your happiness. That's when the real grief sets in, not the kind you feel when you lose someone, but the kind that creeps in when you realize they were never who you thought they were. And maybe they never would be. Life, for a while, became simple in all the ways it never had been before. I didn't know it then, but that period, those quiet mornings breastfeeding June while the sunlight slid across the nursery floor, the soft hum of Arthur's tired but gentle voice reading baby books aloud after long shifts, became something of a recovery phase. A slow and necessary one. Like coming up for air after holding your breath for far too long. The hardest part wasn't the silence from my mother. It was the silence in me. The voice that had always nagged, "Maybe you're being too harsh, what if she just didn't know better, what if she's sorry and doesn't know how to say it," that voice had grown quiet. And in its absence, I was left with this strange peace. Not relief. Not closure. Just the absence of chaos. But as with anything in families like mine, that peace didn't last long. About a year after June was born, we attended a friend's wedding in Sacramento. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just one night, maybe brunch in the morning. But someone tagged Arthur and me in a group photo on social media, and within hours, my phone was lighting up. My mother. Aunt Denise. A few cousins. Even Leandro. "Didn't know you were in town. Wow, avoiding us much? Still punishing your mother? That's cold. And then, you really brought a baby into the world just to keep her from her own blood? What did Viola ever do that was so unforgivable?" I didn't respond. But something in me cracked. Because that guilt-laced accusation, was exactly the kind of emotional shrapnel I'd spent years pulling from my own skin. The way they all defaulted to me being the cruel one, for not allowing more access, more leeway, more of my life to be theirs. Like my boundaries were the offense, not their repeated betrayals. I didn't say anything to Arthur that night. But I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the hotel room, watching June's chest rise and fall in the portable crib next to the bed. And all I could think about was this unbearable truth: they still didn't get it. They never would. They had no idea why I stepped away, and worse, they didn't want to understand. In their minds, I had become the problem. The divider. The ungrateful daughter. A week later, my mom sent a gift box to our house. No note, just a baby-sized bracelet with my late father's initials engraved on it. Something she probably had made just for drama. Something meant to guilt me into melting. I stared at it for a long time. Arthur came up behind me in the kitchen and put a hand on my back. Do you want to send it back? I shook my head. No. That's what she wants. A reaction. He paused. Then what do you want to do? I didn't answer. Not right away. Because I didn't know. Part of me wanted to burn the whole thing. Another part wanted to write a long letter, clear, honest, damning, and send it to every single one of them. And a small, aching sliver wanted to cry in my mother's lap and ask why I was never enough for her to just choose me, for once. But that part is shrinking now. That part no longer dictated my choices. Instead, I tucked the bracelet away in a drawer. Next to the letter. Next to every card and picture and thinking of you that had arrived over the past year like passive-aggressive time bombs. I didn't burn them. I didn't throw them away. I just let them sit there, quiet, unacknowledged. Like artifacts from another life. Time moved on. June learned to walk. Then talk. She called Arthur Dada before her first birthday, and when she called me Mama for the first time, something warm and ancient broke open in my chest. I didn't feel like a daughter anymore. But I felt like a mother. And for the first time in my life, I felt like someone who was finally free from being who others needed me to be, just so they could feel comfortable with their own mess. Still, every once in a while, the shadows of that old life crept in. When June started daycare, I filled out the emergency contact forms and paused at the question, who else is authorized to pick up your child? My hand hovered over the line. I thought of how automatic that answer would have been years ago, my mom, without hesitation. Aunt Denise, probably. Even Leandro if I'd been desperate. But now? No one. I left it blank. I realized then that I wasn't just estranged. I was alone in the traditional family sense. No backup aunties or grandparents. No holiday obligations. No family BBQs or group texts about birthdays. It was liberating, and sometimes lonely. But it was real. And it was honest. I started thinking about what kind of mother I wanted to be. Not just in the day-to-day, but in the long run. What kind of legacy I was creating. Whether I'd be able to raise a daughter who didn't feel burdened by guilt or silence. Who didn't equate self-worth with service to others. Who never wondered if love was conditional on her usefulness. That became my new compass. Every decision filtered through that lens. Will this help or harm the kind of mother I want to be? And slowly, the need for approval from people who had never truly seen me faded away. June was nearly 4 when the last major attempt came. It was around the holidays. Arthur and I had just returned from a quiet cabin weekend in Mendocino, our new tradition to replace the years I had spent at chaotic family dinners where resentment was served between courses. There was a thick, glossy envelope in the mail when we got home. The return address wasn't familiar, but the handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. Inside was a formal invitation. It was for a family legacy celebration. A banquet hall had been rented in Sacramento, complete with catering, music, a commemorative photo slideshow, and a special presentation honoring Viola's sacrifices and contributions to the family. Yes. My mother had orchestrated her own family tribute night. I should have been angry. But instead, I laughed. The flyer included photos from decades past, my parents' wedding, baby pictures of Leandro, Uncle Ray's retirement party. I flipped through the images and paused at one taken during the failed business launch. Leandro stood beaming in front of the now-defunct vape shop, arms around my mom and Aunt Denise. It looked like a grand opening. I had taken that photo. None of them mentioned me in the caption. Then I saw the back of the flyer. There, tucked between RSVP instructions and dress code details, was a request for donations toward a new family development fund, with checks payable to my mother's name. I stared at it, stunned. After everything, after years of silence and guilt and emotional debris, they wanted money. Again. Arthur came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked at me, his mouth a firm line. I know that look, he said. What look? The one you get right before you decide to burn everything down, quietly, efficiently, and without raising your voice. He wasn't wrong. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I did something different. Over the years, I'd kept quiet publicly about what happened. I never posted about the betrayal or the money or how my family had treated me. But I'd documented everything. Not for revenge. For clarity. For myself. Receipts. Texts. Emails. Bank transfers. Even a few voice recordings my mother had left me in the early days when I was still trying to extricate myself financially. And I had grown a small but loyal community online of women in similar positions, estranged daughters, scapegoats, people-pleasers in recovery. So I decided it was time. I didn't name names. I didn't post addresses. But I wrote a long, careful post under my real name and photo. I laid out the timeline, how I had paid for a cousin's business while still entry-level in my career. How I'd been excluded from a family land sale. How I'd been emotionally manipulated for decades by a mother who used guilt like a weapon and treated boundaries like betrayal. I didn't frame it as vengeance. I framed it as survival. Within days, it spread further than I expected. People reshared it. DMs flooded in. Friends from college reached out. Former coworkers who remembered those months when I seemed off finally understood why. And then the kicker, a local journalist who ran a podcast about financial exploitation in families asked to interview me. I said yes. The podcast episode aired the same week as my mother's banquet. It was titled, "When Helping Family Costs You Everything." They changed all the names. The details were anonymized. But everyone who needed to recognize the story did. I didn't attend the banquet. But I heard it didn't go well. Leandro stormed out halfway through. Aunt Denise got into a loud argument with a second cousin who had listened to the podcast and started asking questions about the land money. My mother left in tears before the photo slideshow even started. Someone filmed part of the chaos and uploaded it to TikTok. I didn't watch it. But Arthur did. He just showed me the comment section, shaking his head. Dozens of people, strangers, writing things like "I know someone like this" and "You reap what you sow." About a month later, I received one last letter. From my mother. Shorter this time. No grand explanations. No backhanded guilt. Just one line, scrawled hastily, "I never thought you'd turn on us like this." I didn't reply. But I did feel something shift inside me. Because that line, the thing she thought was the ultimate condemnation, was the truth I had needed all along. I hadn't turned on them. I had simply turned toward myself. Toward the life I wanted. The family I was building. The peace I finally had. I tucked that letter in the same drawer with the rest. And then I opened a new one. I finally registered the LLC for the financial education platform I'd been quietly building. A mentorship community for women navigating financial manipulation from within families. I called it Boundaries First. Arthur helped me design the logo. June colored on the early drafts. And when the site went live, the first story I posted anonymously on the blog section was titled, "Family Comes First. Until you realize you were never really considered family." It went viral. That was my revenge. Not screaming. Not fighting. Just building a life so steady, so self-made, and so out of their reach, that all they could do was watch from a distance. Not out of punishment, but because I finally understood, some people aren't family. They're simply relatives. And I don't owe them a seat at the table I built without their help.